Hi everybody, my name is Matthew Poes with Poes Acoustics, and in this video I'm answering questions again. I'm going to answer one from John Woodcock. How many speakers and subs would you put in a small cinema room, and what size of speaker driver unit would you choose? Would it be better to go with 7 quality speakers and 2 subs, or go for 11 speakers plus 4 subs? It's a tricky question, actually, but probably the 7 speakers with 2 subs over the 11 speakers with 4 subs. We've talked about this at Audioholics before, so I've done videos I know where we've brought this up. I've talked about it here. Speakers are one of the most dominant factors in the sound quality of your system. If you go and you buy 11 mediocre speakers, because, I mean, think about it. When you go from 7 to 11, you're talking about adding 4 speakers. From a budget standpoint, you've now had to spread the same budget over a much smaller number of speakers. So what ends up happening is that the quality of that speaker has to go down. Something has to give. And I understand there are people out there who think that what's given is like maybe, I don't know, profit or build, like, finish quality. But in many cases, most cases, it's sound quality that actually is given up when you go down, especially at those lower price points. Then you've got the subwoofers, right? Well, I've long said, and I kind of backtracked, and I guess it's like I feel the same as I always did, except for that I think it's a more nuanced issue, which was that you don't have to use expensive subwoofers to get good bass, because bass is bass. The problem is there's a lot of cheap subwoofers that don't actually produce good bass. So I've long noted that the CTA numbers that even I produce need to be taken with a grain of salt. There's some problems with the CTA 2010 burst test approach that is not really revealing of sound quality on a subwoofer or even output. And there are some problems with the test that make it very unreliable and cause massive differences between testers. Worse yet, within the tester. So retest reliability with that is fairly poor, and like interlab and intra-lab testing is very poor. So we have, I'm not going to get into who or what, but we have done, or I have been a part of experiments, and other people that I'm good friends with in the industry have done experiments where a reviewer, for instance, will come to a facility to test a subwoofer, and then the manufacturer will test the subwoofer together at the same time using the same software but using their own tools, and gotten very different results. Not 1 dB or 2 dB, but like 6+ dB often. And I would argue anything over 2 dB is a serious problem. The test, in theory, was supposed to be accurate down to a much lower level, like half a dB, but it's just not, and there's good reasons for it, including the test signal. The cycle length that was chosen, while chosen for good reason, does actually compromise the reliability. The test reliability could be improved if they extended the cycle length to something like 10 cycles instead of 6. So I'm getting into a side rant right now, but point being, the numbers alone don't tell you enough about a subwoofer's performance. There's a lot of other factors, and so while I don't believe that you have to spend a fortune to get really good bass, I do believe that there are differences in bass quality depending on the sub, and that the best subs I've heard tend to be relatively expensive. I think I'll give a shout out to my friend Jeff. I think JTR makes some fantastic subwoofers. I think the RS1 and then the RTJ Sub 18 are among the best sounding subs I've ever heard. Perlisten makes great subwoofers. They sound really good. KEF actually makes some really good subwoofers, and their pricing is not bad, all things considered. So all of those would be subs I would recommend. There are other brands where I think you can get good performance within limits, but there's certain products I might stay away from, like with Artnovion, because I've used those now in a few systems. I like the 2S, the dual driver sealed one. It has some limits, and the distortion does tend to skyrocket if you push the thing up towards those limits. But used within its limits, it's pretty clean and nice sounding. The inharmonic noises are well controlled. Not a bad sub for the money. Not great for infrasonic type stuff. If you really want that, I'd go with something else. The vented one I don't really love. I think that the vent makes noise, and to be honest with you, sorry Jeff, I'm not a huge fan of his porta subs either. I mean, they're certainly better than a lot of the others I've heard. I'm not a huge vented sub fan. I used to like them. I actually still own one. But what happened was after hearing enough systems where I was like, I like this, but I really don't like that, I realized that I don't like that almost always pointed to a problem caused by a port. And so I've gotten to a point where I've just become jaded. I don't like ports. I don't want them in my subs. They just cause too many issues. I'd rather just use more sealed subs to make up for the output deficit. So, so with subwoofers, you know, there's kind of a two-pronged issue. One is that we need enough subwoofers to give us enough dynamic range, but the other one is having more subwoofers in different parts of the room make it easier to get a good response in the listening position and over other positions that people will sit. So it's nice to have 4 subs when you can. But if I have to make a compromise, I'm going to make the system as good as I can for one person, and 2 subs I can probably do that with. Then we have the speakers. Well, like I said, I don't want to spread that budget over a larger number of speakers and have to make the speakers worse. So you got to make sure you're using a good speaker that has, you know, really appropriate, adequate performance before you start getting into more of those. In my own system, I have 7 speakers. I don't have 9 speakers. I don't have 11 speakers. Now, what should I have in here? Per CEDIA RP22 standards, this should have 11 bed layer speakers and 4 overhead speakers. That would be what's appropriate. But let's go back to the budget thing. Well, I'm a dealer and I'm a friend of the company's, and so I get a good price on the product. It's not free. It's an expensive product. And the problem is I would have had to have gone to a different product to have been able to afford 11. And it wasn't just the speakers, because remember, I have an Altitude 16, which is a pretty high channel count processor. That's 20 channels. But if I had done that, given how many subwoofer channels I need for waveforming, the Altitude 16 would not have been adequate. So now I got to go to an Altitude 32 with 32 channels. The 24 might have worked, but probably 32 channels. I would have had to have gone to more amplifier channels. So for this room, I would have needed, I guess I would have needed probably the Amplitude 16, I guess, matching amplifier would have been adequate. And I would have had 1 channel to spare. Power-wise, it would have been okay, but actually the speakers I used, the S7Is, really, I think 400 to 500 watts is what you should be giving them as their amplifier, and that amplifier doesn't do that. So arguably, I would need either 2 Amplitude 16s and then bridging a bunch of channels for the higher power speakers, or I would need a different set of amplifiers for the front 3 channels plus an Amplitude 16. So you can see how quickly the cost of everything starts to escalate, trying to make sure that everything isn't made worse by just having more channels. And then the issue becomes, well, what kind of performance enhancement would you have gotten had you gone with 11 channels versus 7 like I did in my system? And I would argue from my experience that while yes, the 11 channel system might sound a little bit more immersive, the difference is small compared to the compromises I would have to stay within budget and lessen equipment. So had I gone, for instance, with, I don't know, R-series speakers, which I went with the S-series more because I just wanted to be able to show people those. The R-series is a really good speaker. That would have been a good way to lower the cost and go with more channels. But it is a lower output speaker and it doesn't sound quite as good. So I would have had some small compromises there. The lower output I don't think would be an issue in my room because I'm not anywhere near the limits of what the speakers could do, but they don't make an R7i. And I really wanted the vertical directivity capabilities of the 7 series. So I had to go with an S. But let's just say I went with the R5i. Again, I don't think I would have been at the limit of its output. I would have been okay. But then, like I said, I would have had to have gone to a higher channel count processor. That would have been very costly, and the whole system would have just gotten more expensive. So, like I said, my opinion would be that that's just not worth it. I think for you guys, a lot of people chase high channel count because I think it's kind of like, it's sexy. It's like buying a cool sports car. But the reality is it's kind of like buying the really cheap, crappy sports car instead of going and buying a not sports car, but better quality vehicle that overall would give you better enjoyment, better reliability, and better day-to-day experience. I think that in this case, the better day-to-day experience comes from the lesser number of speakers. A lot of the research that was done on channel count really has never supported really high channel count. I mean, that's one of the things I've always questioned about why we push the high channel count stuff, is that they did a lot of research on this and they didn't walk away and say, hey, you know, the 12 channel system sounded substantially better than the 5 channel system. It was quite the opposite. What they found was the difference between the 5 channel system and the 12 channel system was extremely minimal. It was like 99% basically of the performance was achieved with 5 to 7 channels, and going higher than that didn't add a lot of value. If that's true, then that's a waste. You've also got another issue, guys, and I think a lot of you know this. A lot of content doesn't actually support the higher channel counts. I don't know why they're doing this. I've talked to people in the industry to get good answers, and all I've gotten is it may be related to budget stuff, but there is content that we watch which has been intentionally limited in such a way that when you play it back on a system, even like a Trinnov, that can handle very high rendering counts, it will be locked out of those channels. Your 2 to 4 of your tops may not be doing anything, your wides may not be doing anything, and then if you start adding additional surrounds and everything else, they may not be getting a lot of content there because the data was put together in such a way that ultimately what really happens with the processor is it acts like an array instead of properly panning stuff around you. So, I mean, obviously we should build a system to be as high performance as we want it to be. That's part of how you do this, and the content is secondary. You know, like we want to build the system, and then the content, we just have to find what makes sense to play back on it to really show what it can do. But when most of the content we play back is not supportive of the system we put together, it's kind of a show pony and not a very useful one. So I'm not a huge fan of really high channel count systems. I love doing them for people, but for my own system, probably not something I would do. Having said all that, we'll call it for research purposes, probably will increase the channel count in this room over time. And I probably should and would set up some example systems where I do maybe like a 5.1, 7.1, 7.1.4. Maybe we'll go up to 6, so a 7.1.6, 9.1.6, 11.1.6, and have some people over and try content out and see if moving to the different higher channel count presets lead people to say, okay, yeah, that sounds better, or not. And then maybe I'll do another video where I'll say, hey, remember when I used to say that I think higher channel count doesn't matter? Well, here's what we found. I've changed my mind. But as of today, based on my experiences, I haven't really walked away impressed enough by the higher channel count benefit to feel it's worth it when it compromises speakers. And I think the compromises it makes on speakers is typically way too significant to ignore. So I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching. Thanks for asking these questions. I actually enjoy doing this. And keep watching for more of them. Thanks.